Hey guys, Pete here. Today I'm going to dive into my rewatch of Mr. Robot Season 1. This is my third time going through the season, but the first time after the conclusion of Season 2. Even though I know what happens beyond what I'm watching, my plan is to look at each episode independently and not spoil future events. I'll point out what stands out to me this time through, but it should be fine to watch for both people who've already seen the episodes and those who are brand new to Mr. Robot. I'll talk more at the end about specific reasons I fell in love with this show, but I'm going to do a quick overview right now before I get started. Mr. Robot is layered, and this leads to a lot of fun speculating in between episodes each week. I think what's compelling about the show actually develops over time, but in the beginning it's all about Elliot. In this pilot episode especially, through building the events within Elliot's head and then providing clues that he isn't the most reliable narrator, sets the wheels in our head spinning and the whole thing kind of builds from there. Also, by all accounts, the show establishes a look, a sound, and the acting is top-notch across the board. The pilot has a few minor problems that I'll get to later, but overall the vision of the series is delivered even though we're not exactly sure where things are headed. Alright, so I'm going to jump into the recap now. I'm going to try to keep it as brief as possible, but a ton of information comes up here. So I am going to point out the characters, the important events, and we'll go from there and dig deep after this part. So, in the very beginning, we get a formal introduction as us as an imaginary friend. It starts out with, "Hello, friend," and Elliot talking about the idea of creating this. We are, in a way, his imaginary friend, and this will become more clear later as he confides in us about what's going on, and his struggle in understanding everything that's going on in front of his eyes. So we get a mention here of the 1% of the 1% who Elliot now believes is following him. Before the creator, Sam Esmail, dives directly into these conspiracies and sort of like this hacktivist collective mindset, we start out with seeing Elliot and realize that he's socially awkward, a bit anxious, probably clinically depressed, and he's a cybersecurity engineer by day, but also has a life at night where he's basically a vigilante hacker. We learn this at first when we meet Ron. Elliot confronts Ron at his coffee shop, and we see that he actually has a bit of a connection with him before the downfall. This is kind of interesting, and we learn that Elliot's father was the only person he could talk to, but he died. He points out that this happened in relation to the place where his father worked, and that his father's gone, but the corporation still exists. Find out he doesn't really care about money. He's not hacking his own personal gain. He's kind of a Robin Hood in a way, and he's there because Ron has some ties to child pornography, and he eventually sets him up and turns him into the police. After that, we see him being paranoid on the train, and we run into the first sighting of Christian Slater's character. Then we meet two characters, Angela and Gideon, at where he works, which is a place called Allsafe. We get a better look into how strange and uncomfortable Elliot can be when we see him standing outside Angela's birthday party. We know he's known her for his entire life, but he still can't force himself to go into the door and hang out with her on her birthday, even though she wants him to be there. We meet Krista, Elliot's therapist. She mentions something about how he got there and about controlling his anger, but we don't get any more information about why he's there or what he points out as how he ended up there. He didn't go there on purpose. She asks him a question about what is it about society that disappoints you so much, and we understand a little bit better about what his major problem is with society at large. He goes into this monologue that we find out is just imagined later, but he rants about late capitalism, social media, retail sedation, the way that we buy things and consume things because we need to feel better. We create these online persona that make us the person that we would like to be rather than the person that we are. And we basically learn that he hacks into people's lives with good intentions, like he wants to right wrong. and we saw that with Ron and the pornography ring. He tells Krista that it's painful not to pretend, and she says that when you hide, your delusions come back. We don't learn any more about these delusions, but we get hints around the fact that him being paranoid that people are following him, and that we see these guys kind of like Men in Black type guys in suits that seem to be hanging around when he goes places. We meet Angela's boyfriend, who seems like a real tool for the most part. One of my favorite lines of the pilot is him saying, "I'm okay with it being awkward," to Ollie. But really, it's just more of the same. He's just really developing the character. We get an introduction to ECorp, which is the company that Elliot despises. He calls it Evil Corp, and we notice several times that he actually has reprogrammed his brain to hear Evil Corp, even when other people say the name, or we see commercials and things. We meet different characters. Terry Colby, the CTO of Evil Corp, Tyrell Wellick, who is a underling of Terry Colby's, but we get that he tries to connect with Elliot on some levels on a tech playing field, I guess you could say. And he says as he walks away after they talk, he says, "Bonsoir, Elliot," and this kind of comes back up again later. Back at his apartment, we find out he has a fish, and it's very important to him. We see him having a crying fit, and he says, "I hate when I can't hold in my loneliness." And we get an idea that this has been popping up more often lately. We also see that he has a tendency to want to control the uncontrollable, I would say, with his morphine and Suboxone. Like, he explains to us his well thought out plan of how he avoids becoming addicted, but anybody can guess that that's not something that is done through logic. Addiction is addiction because it takes a hold of people. So we get that there. We meet Shayla, who lives across the hall. She's his connection for the Suboxone. He ends up taking drugs with her, and he tells us never make decisions when you're on morphine. They're in bed after their Molly excursion, and he gets a notification on his phone, and we find out that he's trying to hack Krista's boyfriend. He eventually is able to do that with a little bit of social engineering, and after the fact, he gets a call from Angela at 3 a.m., and there's a big Evil Corp hack that's going down. In dramatic fashion, he stops the hack along with Gideon, who flies him to the server farm. But he leaves an infected server there after he wonders why he wants to leave it. This is a critical part of the development of the story, and since we don't know much about Elliot yet, we don't really know why he has this, but it definitely comes back again later. We see a rare bonding moment with Gideon on the plane. There's an awkwardness where Gideon comes out to him, but we see Elliot make an effort, and he's able to kind of promise Gideon that he'll take care of things. On the train ride home, we meet Mr. Robot officially for the first time. He approaches him, tells him to follow him. He explains that if he didn't delete it, then he should come along. If he did delete it, then it's over. And they go to Coney Island, visit an arcade. He finds out that the DDoS attack was a test. He sees others there, but he doesn't talk to anyone. And he just learns a little bit about what's going on from Mr. Robot. He leaves there thinking he's crazy, and he goes through his mind asking us if we saw what he saw, and he's kind of trying to say, it's not a delusion, I had seen this is a fact. So he's sort of just trying to reinforce what's reality and what's not. When he gets home, Angela's waiting for him, and she wants to watch Back to the Future 2 with him because it's his favorite movie. But when they go inside, Shayla's still there. He asks her to leave, and then he searches for FSociety, but he doesn't find anything. After that, he goes back to Coney Island to tell them that he's going to turn them in, and there we get the payoff of Mr. Robot explaining their plan. Elliot is sort of drawn in by this idea of erasing everyone's debt. He's not 100% on board, though. He goes into the meeting, and Terry Colby is totally disrespectful and a giant dick to Angela, and that convinces him to give up the altered DAT file. He knows that this is going to implicate Colby, and we get a jump in time afterwards where 3 weeks pass. At that time, he finally gets to the bottom of who Krista's boyfriend is, finds out he's married, and he makes him break up with her at that time. We see at Krista's urging, he goes and he talks to Angela, and they have a moment, but it gets interrupted when news of Terry Colby's arrest happens on TV. He seems pretty excited overall about this whole thing as he's watching the news at Times Square. He says, this is happening. But just as that goes down, we meet this new character. His name is Mr. Sutherland, and he tells Elliot to get in the car, and they take him back to Evil Corp. There's a bit of a cliffhanger here where we see Tyrell again, and he says, bonsoir, Elliot, and we're left not knowing exactly why or what's going on at the end of the episode. We just know that someone picked him up off the street after Terry Colby got fired, and now he's in a place where he doesn't really like to be. So I mentioned there were a couple of weak points or things that raised red flags for some people in episode 1. For what I understand, as in this was totally technically over my head, so it didn't stand out for me. The show took certain liberties in the way Elliot gathered information on Ron, the coffee shop owner, in the beginning. In other words, people who were really tech savvy have been gravitating towards this show, and they had issues with it. Apparently, Sam Esmail mentioned that he wished he hadn't done it that way, and the show beyond this puts a lot of effort into making what Elliot and the others do on their computers technically sound. They have a guy who is a technical director who puts a lot of time in setting things up that, down to the computer screens and everything else we see. And I know from following the fandom that people are pretty impressed with the way that they do things after this one event. The other thing is that Mr. Robot's plan to erase debt as a way of just redistributing wealth. I mean, whether you understand economics or not, this might strike you as a way too simple solution to a very complex and entrenched problem. And you'd be right, but you have to go at this, you just have to let it go at this point. Without spoiling anything, I'll just say that don't get hung up on this because we'll learn more about the motivations and viability of the FSociety ideas as things progress. The good news here is that these are pretty much small potatoes, particularly in a pilot episode of a brand new series, and just stick with it and the rewards will come. So one of the major things here is that, Elliot's a likable character, but we can't trust him because he can't trust himself. And even though he does this hacktivism, I guess you would call it, where he does good things with his hacking, he also hacks his friends to discover secrets about them, partly because he just wants to know, but more so because he has difficulty talking to them. You know what I'm saying? He knows things that he shouldn't actually know about people, and he finds it because he's talented, but it's also a way for him to avoid just learning people skills. So it's not necessarily he's not a perfect hero in that way. He obviously has something in his past that has landed him in Krista's office. So you can imagine that she's going to be an important character. And there is some delusion involved that we hear from her. So, some things that we see that he sees, or we see through his eyes, I guess you could say, may not be real. So I think that, even though he's a flawed character, he's clearly the hero of the story. And I think they do a good job here of bringing us into how human he actually is, how complex and damaged his psychology is, and give us an idea that he's not really a bad person. What he is a lonely person, and we saw that in the scene where he's crying in his room. We see that he also abuses drugs. And, like I said, the hallucinations and things are real on some level. His father, as he mentioned, was the only person he could ever talk to. That guy died. It was leukemia from exposure to workplace radiation. We saw in a quick scene that his mother was abusive. He's distant. He's not naturally able to communicate with people in small talk and things like that. He sort of wears the hoodie with the zipped up kind of security blanket thing going on. And, it says a lot about the actor. He won the Emmy last year for Best Actor in a Drama Series, and he's definitely really good. He brings this character to life, and it's an interesting thing to watch. So that's pretty much it for the first episode. Make sure you leave any questions you have in the comments. I'll put some links to where you can watch it and things like that in the description. There's only 2 seasons at this point, so there's plenty of time to catch up before the show airs next month. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my channel and set your notifications if you're into Mr. Robot or any of the other shows I do. I'm going to go through this season at the very least. I've already got episode recaps for season 2 because I did them last year, but I may relook at some of those, and I am planning to go through the companion book next as well. That goes along with season 2 though, so I want to get through this first. So yeah, lots of Mr. Robot stuff this season. If you follow me for other shows, you know how I do it. I'll do several videos each week when it's in season, so make sure you check back. If you like Twin Peaks, check my Patreon account. I got a Twin Peaks book giveaway going on there, and I will be looking for future ideas on that show and other things, so just read all about it there. So that's it for now. Thanks for watching, guys. I will talk to you soon.